Hey, this is Justine from I Am, and today we are interviewing the wonderful Dawn Grace Kelly, expert extraordinaire with past life regression and all things spiritual, metaphysical, trance. So hi, Dawn.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Good to have you again. So for the listeners today, some people haven't met you, Dawn, and be cool to go through just kind of what got you into past life regression, your journey, and then maybe going into what it is and what people can experience having a past life regression, and also your teaching and what you do.
Okay, all right, I'll see if I can remember all those things. So thing one is, how did I get into this work? Well, in a past life, in this lifetime, because I think we have those, I was a flight attendant. And actually, it goes back a bit before that, because I was training in my late teens to be a naturopath. So I've always been interested in natural healing and alternative health. So yeah, training to become a naturopath. There were jobs for flight attendants, and I thought that sounded glamorous and wonderful, which it kind of was for a little bit. And so I got into that work, and my plan was to do that for a couple of years and then get back to my naturopathic studies. So that lasted a little bit longer than I thought it would, because it was a kind of fun lifestyle. But I was keeping up with my training, and it was getting a little bit more esoteric, I guess. I think I moved into massage, and I probably need to say that I was raised by a professional astrologer. My mum's a professional astrologer. So the metaphysical teachings were always on the periphery. I wasn't sort of taking them on board as such, but I'm sure I must have soaked it up in my energy field. But yeah, so I was studying massage and anatomy and physiology and all sorts of interesting things about the body while I was still a flight attendant. And it slowly got a little more esoteric. So in my late 20s, I would have been reading all about past life regression, like a lot of you might have. And I had the opportunity to have a past life regression. I was living in Perth at the time. And that blew me away when I saw that little ad in the newspaper. It was newspapers back then, because I thought it was something that just happened overseas. You know, I've been reading Dolores Cannon and Brian Weiss, and it was all this like really cool stuff that was happening overseas. But there it was in Perth. So I raced off, got myself a session, experienced 3 past lives that totally blew my mind. And not so much the content of the life, although one of them was as a ET being on another planet. So that was particularly interesting. But away from the content so much, it was that experience of leaving my body and dying that got me away from the belief in past lives and sliding into that full body knowledge of past lives. I knew there was life after dying, having experienced the very strong emotions around that. So I raced back and got as many as I could afford to do at the time. I loved the work. And then, you know this part of the story, but her teacher was coming out from the States, Reverend Neville Rowe, to teach past life regression. And this was in the mid-90s. And I was so excited to be able to learn to do it. At that point, I was a spiritual healer. I'd been training in, guided healing, and I was channeling, all while I was still a flight attendant, but moving closer towards doing this work full time. Anyway, so Neville was due to come out. 2 weeks before he was due to come, he died in a mountaineering accident, which is kind of ironic, really, when we're talking about life after death and death. So as tragic as that was, it was the key to me learning how to become a past life regressionist, because my regressionist spent 6 months learning how to be a teacher and started passing Neville's work on, and I was in her first course. So that's how I started it. Now, I would practice on flight attendants and pilots, of course, because I was still flying then, and spiritual healing. So I had this sort of side thing going, and, it got to a point where I can't do this lifestyle anymore. I'm really being called. My heart is calling me to do healing work. And I quit in, I think, 95, 96. To start healing work full time. So as a spiritual healer and a past life regressionist and channeling and entity clearing and all sorts of fascinating stuff, moved from that. And a couple of years later, I started teaching. So that's probably what I'm really here to do, is teach, although I still do see clients. So that's how I got into it. So what was the second part of the question?
So for people that haven't experienced a past life or don't really know why you would experience, maybe talk a little bit about what a past life is, what to kind of expect, and what kind of people come along and have a past life.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so why would you want a past life regression? And I'm very familiar with people saying to me, I've got enough to deal with in this life. Why would I want to look at another life? You know, you might have said that. And we've all said that. And it's true. We do have a lot to deal with in this lifetime. And inner child work is something I'm quite passionate about as well, making peace with our trauma and integrating our trauma from this lifetime. So why a past life regression? Because these roots, so if we go back to our childhood and the traumatic things that happened, they are almost always a follow through from a train of lives that we have on particular themes that we're wanting to address. So whilst we're wanting to heal and integrate our inner child wounds and connect in with that, if things don't change in your life because of that, and they often do, and they often don't, and yes, it's healing, but where's the root? Why is XYZ still happening when I've done this work? Sometimes we just have to go back a bit further. So, you know, I'm not attached to how far back we go, whether it's last week or in the womb or your 9-year-old self or another life. There's a root somewhere, and that can sometimes take us into past lives. So I've definitely discovered that we do numerous lives, a ridiculous amount of lives on the one theme, because we are very, very slow to learn. So, you know, I'm quite passionate about karma ending, so we don't have to keep reincarnating over and over to do the same theme. And that means get back to the root, wherever it's from, find out where this came from and make some peace with it. So how does that come about? Well, the content of a past life is always interesting. Well, not always. Sometimes it can be just a little boring farm life with some emotional content, but it's generally quite interesting, the past lives that are up for healing. But that doesn't do the work, just knowing what happened. And I think sometimes we do come into past life work out of curiosity. And people who come for past life work out of curiosity quickly find that this is a healing therapy, which I'll talk more about in a moment. And that can begin a new journey for them. So the content is interesting, but it's not the healing. The healing is about shifting the psychological or the emotional / mental issues that we're holding. So when we die, whatever fear-based emotions or thought patterns are sitting with us in that dying moment, I do put, you know, when I'm teaching past life regression, I do put a bit of attention on that, because if we know what we're taking with us as we transition, we know what we need to do the healing work with. Yeah. Now, and I just want to say, sometimes there is spontaneous healings just from knowing your past life. But I just want to do it. I want to emphasize that information isn't healing. Sometimes a number of things have gone on behind the scenes and you're ready for that shift without further work. But I believe the further work's really important. So after you've died in a past life, we go through a therapeutic process where I'll separate you from being the character that you've just experienced being. It's something that happens in psychology. It's a really interesting way of bringing it outside of yourself so you can dialogue and learn more than rather than being in it. And then we learn what kind of how this character's holding you back, how this energy's holding you back. And I do see this similar as a spirit attachment, which is a whole nother thing to talk about, like lost souls and what have you that attach themselves to our energy field. It's essentially an aspect of our higher self that hasn't integrated home or hasn't integrated yet because of fear-based thought patterns and emotions. So we learn about how you're being blocked, how this character's trying to protect you. For example, don't stand near a cliff or you're going to fall off and die. That might have happened once upon a time, but that might not be what's happening now. And standing by a cliff might be what you need to do for your work. I don't know, I'm making stuff up here. Some people probably do need to do that for their work. And it's becoming a problem for you, right?
Yeah.
So when that energy is shifted out of your energetic field, out of your pattern, and gone back to a higher frequency dimension, where it belongs, where it can heal, then you've suddenly got a whole lot more space in your system for your more light, more of your own higher self to come into your body, so you can be more authentic in this life. Yeah. So I can't remember what the question was anymore. You did ask what sort of people would come. You did.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. What do people generally come for?
Yeah. So a lot of people come out of curiosity, which is fine because they're about to begin a healing journey. But more aware people who've done personal growth work, spiritual development work, they might come to find the root of a physical problem, an emotional problem, or a mental or spiritual problem they have. And when I'm teaching, in my foundation training, we do a good brainstorm of that. So if you think about physical problems, we could go on for ages, right? Because we've got all the big diseases. We've got the sore wrist that never goes away. We've got an allergy. We've got fertility issues and sexual problems and all the things that can happen physically. And then we come up to emotional issues. I mean, I do remember a man years ago an older man who came to me because he was sad. And that stands out to me because sad is something we do in life all the time. And we've got a million things to be sad about in our current lifetime. But he just sensed that this is from another time and it's a deep sadness, and he couldn't put his finger on that.
Yeah.
And sure enough, we were back in a lifetime where he hadn't processed a lot of grief. We shifted, he saw that, he experienced that, we shifted that energy with the therapeutic part of the work, and his sadness was gone overnight, of course. So emotional issues. And then there's all the mental issues. There's all the fears and the phobias and repetitive behavior and OCD stuff and all sorts of things on that mental level that people might want to get back to the root of. And then, of course, there's relationships. If you're struggling in relationships, and don't we just do that? That's what they're all about.
Yeah, well, I think
that's one thing they're about.
Like connection and having that connection and how we relate to each other. Relationship seems to be the biggest thing we experience, in this lifetime or any lifetime.
Yeah. Look, it's a big deal, and I certainly get a lot of people wanting to sort out, to know what was going on between the two of them in a past life, and that brings big shifts today. In fact, I've got a good little example. Do you want to hear a little example?
Totally, yes, definitely.
About relationships, because I'm just thinking of somebody's mother-in-law now. Where was this one? Yeah, it was this one. So I just noted down a couple of sessions that I've done recently that I thought you might be interested in. So Bex, she's in her mid-30s. She's a business owner, her own business. And she found herself in a life as a male in a uniform in her 20s, in a war type situation. So she was captured and put into the ground. Now, this took some skillful regression, I must say, because it was dark and it could appear to a lot of people that she wasn't anywhere, which is what I was starting to think. But with a bit of skill and working with the senses, we realized she was in a hole in the ground where she had been captured, and she was there for a couple of years and tortured there. Now, she survived that because I took her to another important scene, and she was in hospital, or he was in hospital, and he had lost his arm from some of the torture there, and he'd survived. He'd been rescued. So he started drinking, and he had a family at the time. So he was thinking that he's a huge disappointment. He can't talk about anything that happened. And I learned that there was some sexual abuse that happened when he was captured as well. And he was just really ashamed. So we found him at his dying scene with tumors around the lungs. And he couldn't speak. And that's when we realized that he had a stutter. He got a stutter after all of that trauma, which morphed into not being able to talk at all and becoming this bitter, horrible person. So he died feeling really ashamed that he couldn't be there for his family, this, bitter alcoholic. And that's how he died. So if you think about that, you're leaving with, if that was you, you're leaving with resentment, you're leaving with shame, you're leaving with trauma, you're leaving with numerous things. We could unpack that. So what we came with, actually, this isn't the one, it's a good example of something else. It's not an example of what I was about relationships, but it did impact her relationship. So what we learned is that character, or that energy, that part of her higher self that's still here, was blocking her from sharing feelings, was keeping her walled off so she couldn't connect with her relationship. She also discovered that she had been a pedophile in that life. So that was quite like, whoa, I hadn't picked that one up.
Yeah.
And she hadn't wanted to talk about that because of her shame, but through some gentle questioning, we discovered that she had been abused as a child, of course, because that's what happens. That's how that comes about. And then she was sexually abused through being captured as well. So she didn't even feel that she had any rights because she'd done something like that with young people herself. So in real life, she had sexual issues, which is one of the things we were working on. So you can imagine how that would impact that. She had a fear of what she thought was an irrational fear of a heart condition, a vicious dislike of alcoholism to the point where it was a problem for people close to her. She was so anti-alcohol, and a fear of losing her voice, like all of these things that had actually happened. So that's an example of the sort of things you can have. But I picked the wrong one around an example, but another example, in fact, it might have been another life of hers where she was shot. Or was it it doesn't matter. Maybe it was a gun, maybe it was a spear. I can't recall now. But from somebody she didn't know, from the opposition of a war type situation. And as we zoned in on that, or honed in rather on that at the dying experience, we realized that was her mother-in-law that she was having difficulties with in current time.
Yeah.
So obviously somebody who's killing you is going to be a problem in your life down the track. Yeah. So you're setting up some karma there. And let's remember that there's a spiritual plan going on here. Before you incarnate, you're wanting somebody in your soul team to say, I'll be the one who shoots you because you need to learn about blah, 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 opening your heart or whatever it is. So her mother-in-law is obviously in her soul family, but their relationship had been particularly difficult over the last few months as this past life was coming up, and she was getting scared and angry around her mother-in-law. So their relationship is really loving and beautiful, like it was when they first met, because there is a soul connection, but that past life had got in the way. So there's an example of that. So back to what sort of people come: people who are curious, people who want to nail a physical issue that they haven't been able to get to with anything else, and the same with their emotional issues and their mental issues. And sometimes we're dealing with spiritual issues as well. Yeah. I find that we might do this work after they've worked with me doing inner child work or some in other intuitive work that I do, and then they're wanting to go deeper, they're wanting to go further back. So I guess that's the answer to your question.
Yeah. And from experience myself, when you are doing inner child work and when you are doing healing work, people, and this is the direction the healing needs to take place, it can spontaneously happen, can't it?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm a big fan. Yeah, I'm a big fan with my students of encouraging organic one-on-one sessions rather than this is the modality I do, come to me for the modality. I really want students to be present and sit and be with what is, and be able to draw on their skills to go in whichever direction. So you're absolutely right. It can spontaneously come up as an intuition for the therapist, but then giving the person that information I don't find helpful. I'd rather just take them there and use my intuition as a guide of where we're going to go so they can have that experience themselves. And also spontaneous regressions can happen away from session as well. And I've certainly had a number of those. You might have as well, Justine.
Yeah, I have had interesting things.
Yeah, and clients are starting to have that more, or the people I attract, that seems to be happening more as our higher selves are collectively pulling us to ascend and shift what's in the way. So something in our day-to-day life may actually trigger these images and information and emotions suddenly hitting you. Goodness, that happened to me, and it was definitely one of the most full-on experiences that I'd ever had, really, when I suddenly found myself, I was very upset. I was at home quite upset, couldn't pinpoint what was going on, sitting still, breathing into the feeling to see what was happening. And then suddenly I had a sense of a guillotine coming down that was about to hit my head. And it was terrifying. I was I was a good 80% in that experience, with enough consciousness to know that that was happening, but not quite enough to pull myself out of that. So that was absolutely shocking. There was a lot of information. It was a witch kind of situation, a lot of other people being killed as well. But the pain on the back of my neck, and I actually slumped down when that happened and couldn't even breathe properly. But this is the training of the regressionist. So it's not that dramatic for everybody. But knowing that and having that experience did not heal it. In fact, it knocked me around quite a lot. It wasn't until I had somebody facilitate the actual healing of that and a few more memories that I could move through that. And that kind of life, how could a life like that impact me or somebody else? One, maybe you don't want to go ahead with your spiritual work or any of your important work because you know it could bring death about on a deeper level. That's not conscious. This is an unconscious belief operating. And definitely it could give you a problem with speaking out. And I've never liked stuff around my neck. I mean, sometimes there's obvious little signs. So that was a big shift. But yeah, spontaneous regressions, that's a slide away talk. Sorry.
Yeah. So I'm going to do a disclaimer here. I think because we are talking about past life regression and doing work that does involve trauma, that just a disclaimer that it is really super important that if you are wanting to have a past life regression, that you do it with someone that is trained in past life. So even if someone has been trained in regression, with hypnotherapy, which is something I teach, it is really important that you actually go to someone that is trained in past life, because the process is quite different, and the events that you can go back to, as you can hear Dawn talking about, they can be quite full-on events. And so it's really important you do see someone that's experienced and trained in past life. If you are wanting to have a session, Dawn does see a limited, I know a very small amount of clients, but she also has past students that have trained with her. So if you were wanting to experience something, you can contact Dawn, and maybe she can either, if you're very lucky, spend some time with her, or she does have students that she could refer you on to. But yeah, just a disclaimer that you really do need to see a qualified, a person experienced in this work.
Definitely. And thanks for mentioning that, because I did just put out quite a dramatic past life experience. So let me talk a little bit about the trauma, because that's interesting. And I know that can concern people when they're doing deeper work. But really, I encourage all of us to go into trauma, whether it's as dramatic as what I just described or not. It's not until we touch that. We don't have to experience the whole thing. We don't have to go through it inch by inch, because that's not necessary. We just need to know what happened. But as we experience that, we start to unlock frozen energy in our body. And if you've got somebody who's trained and skillful and experienced to hold the space for you, you can move through that really quickly. And feel amazing on the other side of that because of the shift and the release. So another thing I'm a fan of is making peace with our trauma and not avoiding it and touching it. It just needs some experience and holding for you to move through that. But it's a powerful, enlightening experience to do.
Yeah, definitely. Beautiful. So what we could also talk about is, because there are people today, there'll be all walks of life. So people coming in that are just curious about past life, what it is and what to experience. And then, of course, you've got people that are already trained in hypnotherapy or some form of healing modality, and they're interested in learning, which we'll talk about now. And then, of course, you've got people that have probably already done some training in past life, and they're listening for your experience and different techniques or different ways of doing what they're doing. So I think it'd be quite cool to talk about your course and your courses, because I know that you delve into some really cool, deeper stuff that other people don't. But yeah, just talking about even your first step, learning the past life regression, just a bit about it.
Yeah, and probably you might want to know, for those who are not familiar with the work, maybe understanding the process might be helpful too. So to do this work as a therapist, you need some solid foundation training.
Yeah.
So my first course is that solid foundation training. So in that course, we learn how to introduce a client to past life regression. And the introduction to past life regression is quite a bit to know about that, just to set the scene. So all the fears are dispelled, all the information that could get in the way of your client experiencing a regression are on the table, some history, etc. So that's a whole stage, is stage one, introducing your client to a regression. And then we learn how to relax our client and how to take them into an altered state of consciousness, a little bit about altered states of consciousness. And we learn how to set up a meeting with their higher self. So we talk a bit about the higher self, which is not a term that everybody's familiar with. So we learn a bit more about that. And the higher self becomes your guide through the session. So even though we're the facilitators in control of the session, we're referring back to the higher self, which, that's your ultimate wisdom, really. And then we'll move through probably a tunnel into a past life. So those first 4 stages we learn are getting to the point of stepping into a past life. So quite a lot to learn about that. And we do experiential work in pairs to practice all of that before we get to that stage of going into a life, which is the unknown stage, in which you need to learn how to navigate and how to question around that. But essentially in that stage, we're looking for important events, traumatic events. We'll move through what's important, what the client feels is important to look at. We'll talk about how to move through fear and trauma and stuck places, and gather that information before we go to the dying experience, which is a very important part of the session, to learn what psychological issues are going with you when you die. And then we learn how to review that life. Well, we learn how to take someone out of the body and shift, and then we learn how to review that life and some sensible questions to ask that can be helpful. We learn how to release karma. So if there's relationships that are adverse today because of somebody in that life, we do a process around that. And just for interest's sake, that's a 50-50. Sometimes you'll recognize somebody and sometimes you won't. And if it's a good relationship today, there's nothing to heal, but there's usually something that needs healing. So we'll do that. And we also learn how to dialogue with the character to find what's holding you back, how they feel they're protecting you, what's in the way, what are we actually healing? So we get a lot of strong information there and a lot of aha moments. And then we do some spiritual healing work. We learn how to do that. And then we learn how to bring somebody back to day-to-day consciousness. So there's a lot to learn. So yeah, it is I think 4 days is the foundation training. Yeah.
And you're offering it online now, which is really cool, eh?
Yeah. COVID's been many things, as I'm sure it's many things for all of you. But one thing it has done is brought us online a bit more, which has been a really exciting way of teaching. So I've been doing that for the last year, and that's working so well.
Gives us the ability to also help a greater amount of people. Like if you are doing past life, now instead of just your community, you can now actually work with people in a safe way from all around the world if you want to.
Yeah, I know, it's so good.
And we can.
Yeah, definitely. I'm surprised how good it is. I had a bit of resistance around that because I love working face to face, and I'll still do that. But to bring so many people together, and to be able to work in a safe way, it's really beautiful. And what you gain by being in your own home, that's quite precious as well, and can help you soften and go deeper too. So yeah, that's level 1, and that gives you solid foundations. And I love this training for all healers, because I think no matter what modality you're into, it's pretty wise to have some tools around past life work. So if you've got that, you know, and you're heading that way with your client, it's a very easy process with a manual. It's so easy. You can just read it literally. Obviously a bit of experience in some of these areas will make you better, but it's a really beautiful script that works really well.
And you do, and as you said before, in those 4 days, you're actually being the practitioner and also experiencing.
That's right. Yeah, I know there's people that teach past life regression just by demonstration. Some of the really big names, that's how they do that, which I get when you've got hundreds of people in your workshop. But really, you don't know anything until it's experiential. I mean, you can take all the notes and you can receive all that information, but until you've had that experience, you don't really get it. So that's super important. So we're pairing up. You're getting to have the experience, you're getting to give the experience, and yes, you do get demonstrations as well. So there's a beautiful mix of that. And then for those people who are interested in going further, and not everybody is, but some people get quite passionate about this work and want to do more with it, I've got you covered there, because we move into a whole lot of things that I just can't teach in level 1, because you've got to go and do some case studies, you've got to have some experience. And once you've got that experience and you're familiar with the technique, then we can start to bring in some more, what I think are more interesting things, like experiencing animal lives and non-human lives. That's pretty interesting as well. And learning about inner child work for when your client does regress back to current time. And all sorts of just other cool stuff like spiritual healing and intuitive sensing, and how the chakras interplay with healing, and what we can do with that with past life regression. And from there, then we go into masterclasses around spiritual entity release work, and how to work with ET beings or star beings, and off-planet work and ET experiences in the womb, between lives. So that, you know, level 1's a good foundation. But all of this stuff is just... it's so damn interesting, and there's ways that we can incorporate all of that into any of the modalities that we do. So I think it's exciting, definitely.
Yeah, as you said, I think with this kind of work, especially the foundation class, if you are just doing, I shouldn't say just, if you are doing spiritual healing, any kind of even massage, people can actually be brought into these spaces. And if you do have this knowledge to work with people, especially the foundation knowledge of how to move people through in a safe way, I think it's pretty valuable. As you said, a client comes in and you just open the space, and whatever happens, instead of sticking to just one modality. So for people that do the healing and the massage, especially the sound healing and things like that, having this to add on to it if needed, I think is really, really powerful. And of course, running alongside as what you do as well.
Yeah, definitely. You know, you just got me thinking about a student that I had a few years ago who intuitively picks up past lives. And I know people do past life readings and what have you. So she would be doing body work like massage on the table, and she'd get information about their past life, which you can't really do a lot with that except tell them that information. And who knows whether her information is 100%, whether it's symbolic, we don't know. I think she was very good at what she was getting there. But my point is having a reading from somebody about what you're up to in a past life, it's just interesting.
Yeah.
Possibly. It's possibly interesting. It might be very uninteresting. But it's not healing. So it's not a way of working with past lives that I support, although I'm kind of curious about what they're doing with that. But anyway, this student came to me wondering why it was happening, wondering what to do with it. And now she's got an easy way to get the person into that experience without telling them what's going on, so they can do the clearing themselves and she can still go about the work. So yeah, so 2 things. Yes, bring it in and have it as an extra side modality. And 2, be very discerning around people telling you what they see in your aura, what past life they see that you've had.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something in it, maybe there's not, but it's not until you experience something that you're fully empowered with your healing.
I found one thing I find for myself experiencing, and I think where the healing happens is when you actually do feel. I know I had an experience where I was getting quite triggered all the time, and it happened first spontaneously, and I think we worked together after that. But the emotions that you actually feel in the past life, it's so intense and so real that after you've experienced that, it's something that can't just be, you can't just fake these intense emotions, and they are
absolutely. It's a key,
love
really.
or sadness. Yeah, it's the emotion, it's the feeling of it that creates the change and the shift, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely. And it certainly gives people the understanding that they've had a real experience. I'm just remembering a young guy that I saw about a month ago who had never done this work before. He was in his early 30s, curious, open. His partner was very spiritual. She was doing work with me, so he's sort of on the periphery a little bit. But he was classic when he shared afterwards. I found tears coming down my face that I didn't understand. And obviously that was my emotions. And that's what tells me this was real.
Yeah.
He's a bloke who doesn't do emotions. And he's got tears coming down his face at I think it was his baby dying or something. He was a woman in that life. And he knew it was real at that point. Even though he'd been getting some good content beforehand, our doubting ego can still jump in and say, well, maybe that's from the movie that I saw last night or what have you. But those emotions that you're talking about take you into a deepening. And really, it's definitely a feeling experience. Some people worry that they're not going to see anything. And we're definitely visual creatures, but it's not our only sense. So feeling becomes quite important, and I want to bring people back to feeling. So it's not just a visual experience, and some people who don't see, they're more about feeling, and that can be frustrating because we think we should see, but really the feeling is where the healing is, without a doubt.
I always remember the feeling of as that lifetime goes home, essentially, that feeling of lightness, or just of being able to breathe, that you feel as that connection is being released, essentially, when that part that's been holding into our energy and influencing, when it goes home, just that feeling of of release and lightness that you and that's so real.
It's so real, and those of us who are sensitive like you are, and myself, and a lot of our clients, it's such a big part of the session, and it's often quite a physical part of the session, where it literally feels like there's a weight off you.
Totally, 100%, yeah.
And sometimes we feel pulling and tingling and all sorts of things while our healing teams are working on doing that. Oh my God, that makes me want to talk about, God, we could go in so many different directions.
I know. So what we'll do is we'll do a part two. We'll do a part two where we can delve deeper, I guess, into experiences, feelings, kind of go into more out there regressions that we can experience. Maybe even look, if people have questions following this, you can email me. I'll give you an email, or if you write it down right now, it's info @hypnosisnewzealandinfull.co.nz. You could email me, or even you can email Dawn any questions, and we could answer that in the next podcast, because I think, as you said, Dawn, we could probably continue. And another thing I was thinking would be great, Dawn, putting you on the spot, maybe we could even do a little podcast maybe in a few weeks, where you could take people through just a nice little guided past life into something, a positive experience, just something, little
taster. That would be fun.
That could have just a little bit of an experience of what it would be like, just a little starting experience.
Good idea. Easy.
It could be quite cool too.
Yeah.
So, Dawn, if people are wanting to contact you, especially regarding courses, and maybe if they are wanting to have a past life regression, or find out who's facilitating them, how do they contact you?
Email's the best way to contact me, and that's connect@dawngracekelly.com. I am on Facebook, Dawn Grace Kelly on Facebook. Yep. Messaging there I don't get so quickly, but connect@dawngracekelly.com will get me quite quickly.
Awesome. And of course you've got your website, Dawn Grace Kelly, and Dawn also has an amazing book too that goes into
I do. If I just lift my laptop here, I'll show you.
For people that can't see, I will put a picture. It's called Truth, Spirit, Love. Yeah. And it's got a beautiful horse on the front cover. So so that's amazing speaking to you today, Dawn. And I'm sure lots of people have found it interesting, and it's probably opened up people's minds to another way of thinking, which I think is why we're here, is getting people to open up and explore. Well, look,
I just want to say on that point, actually, because we're definitely doing that. And one of the amazing things that comes, I mean, we've talked a lot about healing with past life regression, but I actually like something even more than the healing work, which is hard not to like about past life regression. But what I particularly love about past life regression is it brings people to a place where they're not scared of dying, where they understand that there's more. And when we lose our fear of death, it changes our life in amazing ways. I mean, that's a whole thing to talk about in itself. But healing is one thing. Shifting your fear of death and knowing that we're living in a 3D matrix and there's so much more, that is life changing too.
Yeah. Mind blowing.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you very much for coming along today, Dawn. And for everybody listening, have an awesome day and awesome sleep if you're listening to it in the evening, as most people do. And we will catch you next time.
Yeah, thanks for listening. It's nice sharing with you, and I'd love to hear what questions you have. That would be interesting.
Awesome.
For next time. Okay, bye-bye.
Yeah.